by the way.
Yeah, now the hot summer is over.
Yeah.
So I'm happy now.
So basically, Tokyo has 2 months of decent weather. You have like after the summer, the fall and the spring in Tokyo are amazing. The summer and the winter, not so nice. But
No,
yeah,
only 2 months of the year is not so nice, which is July, August. The rest is beautiful. It's
yeah,
perfect for
no,
me. Yeah.
not really.
I can let my hair down now. I don't have
Yeah,
to hide my hair anymore. Yeah.
April. You want to be there in April and October. Those are your 2 months. Because you get the cherry blossoms in April, you get the fall happening in October, and Japan's amazing in both of those months. But otherwise,
No,
yeah,
they just don't
yeah,
come in July, August. Okay, the
yes.
rest is good.
Okay, so the service that I use to track all of the best, most shared articles across the internet apparently took Labor Day off. So I have very relatively. It hasn't been updated barely since yesterday, or there's been very little tweeting since yesterday. One of the two. So I'm not sure which. So the top story I would request everybody find an article from their part of the world professionally or geographically to share. I can
I sent you a whole bunch of tweets in the
okay.
last
I yeah
several
I
hours.
yeah pick your favorite two, and I have everybody's tweets that they tweeted in. I need to go through those, and we will go through those. But if everyone can find their favorite one, that would be really helpful. So I've got the biggest one at this very moment is from a company called ProtonMail. And ProtonMail, for those who don't know, there is the Uber geeks, the developers and people who are really, deep into the bowels of the internet. There's a notable trend developing, which is we don't trust the big tech companies, and we're not interested in using Gmail or Google Docs or all of the big tech, and we don't trust it. And so Proton Mail is designed for that audience in mind of the Uber geeks who no longer trust big tech. Okay. And there's a mail like Proton Mail. There's browsers like the Brave browser. There's basically replacements for every traditional productivity app you can think of, now being designed with true kind of real privacy in mind, real end-to-end encryption in mind. So Proton Mail, that's what Proton Mail is. So Proton Mail is under fire for disclosing a French activist's IP address to Switzerland's authorities. And now Proton just shot itself in the fucking face, because the whole now everyone's going to have to find a new mail service who was worried about privacy, because this is exactly why they were using it, was to precisely avoid this type of scenarios. So Proton, understandably under fire. I'm sure you have everybody on the platform is now in a diaspora to find a truly protective email service, because Proton disclosed a French activist's IP address to Swiss authorities. Proton Mail had claimed to only log IPs in extreme criminal cases. And maybe this is such a case, but let's open the article and see exactly how they defend themselves in this. So Proton Mail is a hosted email service with a focus on end-to-end encrypted communications, which means nobody can know what's being said. Period. End-to-end encryption means nobody knows what's being said and can't find out even if they wanted to. So Proton has been facing criticism after a police report showed that French authorities managed to obtain the IP address of a French activist who was using Proton Mail. The company has communicated widely about the incident, stating that it doesn't log IP addresses by default, and it only complies with local regulation, in that case, Swiss law. While ProtonMail doesn't cooperate with French authorities, French police sent a request to Swiss police. Oh, this is clever. Via Europol to force the company to obtain the IP address of one of its users. So is ProtonMail based in Switzerland? This is what I'm getting from this? If somebody can Google where's ProtonMail based. For the past year, a group of people have taken over a handful of commercial premises and apartments. Okay, so here's the nitty-gritty backstory. Over the past year, a group of people have taken over a handful of commercial premises and apartments near Place Saint-Marthe in Paris. They want to fight against gentrification, real estate speculation, Airbnb, and high-end restaurants. While it started as a local conflict, it quickly became a symbolic campaign. They attracted newspaper headlines when they started occupying premises rented by Le Petit Cambodge, a restaurant that was targeted by the November 13th, 2015 terrorist attacks in Paris. On September 1st, the group published an article on some blog in Paris, an anti-capitalist news website, summing up different police investigations and legal cases against some members of the group. According to their story, French police sent a Europol request to ProtonMail in order to uncover the identity of the person who created the ProtonMail account. The group was using this email address to communicate. The address has also been shared on various anarchist websites. The next day, somebody from the group went on Twitter and shared an abstract of a police report detailing ProtonMail's reply. According to the Twitter account, the police report is related to the ongoing investigation against the group who occupied various premises around Place Saint-Marthe in Paris. It said, what do they mean occupied, by the way? I would love it if we could find somebody from Paris who happens to know what are these people exactly doing when they say they're occupying premises in parts of Paris. It says the French police received a message on Europol. That message contains details about the ProtonMail account. Here's what the report says. And it's a tweet. And it's in French, unfortunately, but the translation basically says the company ProtonMail informs us that the email address has been created on the IP address such and such. The device used is a such and such device. The data, they obfuscate it, they redact it, they cover it over in black, basically. The data transmitted by the company is limited to that due to the privacy policy of ProtonMail Technologies. So they aren't revealing what was actually transmitted because it's end-to-end encrypted, but they are revealing the IP address and the device type. The IP address issue could be resolved with VPNs, ostensibly. So if you really want to be double careful, use ProtonMail with a VPN. And then if you ever find yourself in this scenario where ProtonMail's giving your IP address to the authorities, then they would be up shit creek without a paddle because they would be sent to an IP address in Istanbul or something. So, but if they give your actual IP address, well, then you're fucked because they could very quite easily figure out where you are based on that. And especially with device type. The next bit is ProtonMail's founder and CEO Andy Yen reacted to the police report on Twitter without mentioning the specific circumstances of the case. In particular, Proton must comply with Swiss law. There it is. That's why France went to Swiss, because this is just the whole whack-a-mole game. This is relevant now in 2021. It will get more and more relevant in 2022-23 when people start to realize if you are an American company doing, you're an American tech company, America owns your ass. They can do whatever they want to you. If you're an India tech company, they can really do whatever they want to. And heaven forbid you're a Chinese tech company. God only knows in the recent headlines what the Chinese can do to you if you're a Chinese tech company. So same applies in Switzerland. If you're a Swiss company, boy, that gives, and this speaks to the power of these decentralized apps that Amay and I were and who else were we talking about this with yesterday? Nicholas, yeah, for sure. We often bring that up. No, the lady who joins us where we often talk about regulation around crypto.
Alexandra?
No.
Donna,
yeah. So, but this speaks to the importance of DAOs because DAOs are not geographically tied. And that's kind of the whole beauty of them. And this again speaks to not just sovereign individuals, but kind of sovereign collaborations where your collaboration shouldn't have to be geographically bound to a particular government. Because today, when you create a business, that business is tied to a government. That's step one. The government's, oh, you're doing business in our geography, then you must register that business with our legal entity structures. And now you are a Delaware LLC, or where it's geographically bound and tied to the laws of that state. Well, why is that? What if Faraz, who's based in the UAE, and Messi, who's in Ethiopia, and I, an American in Thailand, well, where should we make our company if the three of us decide to do something? Why would we make a Delaware LLC? Why wouldn't we make a internet-based organization that is not bound to a geography, which is a DAO, that's decentralized. Decentralized means out of the hands of the governments and the traditional power structures that we've kind of just take for granted, or we just kind of unknowingly participate in. So I would recommend somebody make a decentralized email system, so that you can't have the authorities come, beat you down and force you to cough up IP addresses, for example. Anyway, end of my rant there.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Charles is in the room.
Okay, great.
Hand raised.
Tyler,
yes.
Actually, that's exactly what I'm doing at the moment. That investors, why do they insist the Delaware? In fact, I was trying to say, can I do like the CMC Corp, but at least in Maine, because that's where I'm based and we have a house and stuff like that. And they just insist that, and they say that it's because their lawyers and stuff are familiar with the whole thing.
Yes.
So I don't know. Maybe help me out.
Oh, it's very
I
simple.
can answer that question because I had to go through it. So when I started my hedge fund, and I did it in Nevada, which has very similar laws to Delaware, I was basically cautioned. They said, look, when you go out to investors, everyone uses Delaware, and you don't need any more, gating issues about you want to just be able to raise money. You don't want to have to explain things you don't need to explain. Just do it in Delaware because everybody does it in Delaware. So that's why Delaware. I mean, that's it.
It makes the paperwork much more simple and structured, and you don't have to. It's a known process. So the investors and their accountants and their lawyers know what's in the bottle, so to speak. Like if you buy if you're buying, and there's a terrible example, almond milk, and you buy the same brand of almond milk every time, then you know what's in that almond milk, and you've investigated and you did the hard work of finding out what's really in this almond milk, and is it really organic, and you did it all, and you know it. And then all of a sudden somebody comes up with some form of walnut milk. Shit, now I have to go investigate and really figure out what's really going on. And now you've just added more work to the process. I'm already familiar with this brand of almond milk, and we've been using this brand of almond milk for a very long time. It's like, why does Starbucks only use one particular type of cow milk in all of their stores, globally? And why does McDonald's only use this one farm for all of its French fries? It's just, the consistency makes the process very smooth and easy because we've already done the due diligence. We're already comfortable and feel at ease with the process when we know it's a Delaware company. And when you throw a curveball, it just slows up the process, basically.
I think
Tyler,
it's because of the non-dairy transfer record there is business friendly, and they're very familiar with that.
Well, yeah. By the way, they do make it very easy. It is about one of the easiest places to set up a business, for sure. Yeah.
Tyler, one more.
Okay. Go ahead.
Your point is that's a benefit to the founder. The VC, the investors don't care that it's easy for you as a founder. They care that it's easy for them because of the familiarity of how the legality structure of that company and how it complies with U.S. regulations and everything else.
Yeah. So just a quick point on why Delaware has been used very frequently. It's more than just easy to incorporate. That's actually quite not the biggest reason. The biggest reason is actually in Delaware. Delaware, the system has a very specific legal system favoring the stability and predictability of operating in Delaware jurisdiction. They have a specific chancery court. Really, it's almost unique in the U.S. out of all 50 states that has built up a very long lines of cases, really deciding various different corporate governance issues. Especially this would be relevant if you are getting bigger, such as IBM or these, Morgan Stanley type of companies, where there's going to be complicated corporate governance issues. So that's why Delaware usually is one of the first choices if you plan to do something in the U.S., either IPO or wanted to be bought or buying something else. It favors, not favors, but it's really more predictable for both investors, shareholders, as well as the founders, if you will.
Also very close to D.C. and the seat of government, which is not coincidental.
So the ProtonMail controversy here that with Switzerland, and then BB in the audience did the homework and found that indeed ProtonMail is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, Proton Technologies AG, Switzerland, and the company says it complies with lawful requests for user data, but it also says it contests orders where it does not believe them to be lawful. Yeah, it doesn't really work like that, ProtonMail. You can try that,
but it's essentially if you're not the if you don't pay for it, you're not the user of the product. You're not the customer of the product. You're the user. It's what we've been telling everyone for years, that if you pay for it, then you can have all these wonderful privacy things. But it turns out that even if you pay for it with Apple and ProtonMail and all these other things, it turns out that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, it says somebody did some homework and found that ProtonMail contested 3 orders back in 2017, but in 2020 it pushed back against 750 of the data requests it receives. Okay, so it is pushing back, but that just slows the process down, I guess. Per ProtonMail's privacy policy, the information can provide on a user's account is response to valid request under Swiss law may include account information provided by the user, including the IP address. However, in its transparency report, the company also signals an additional layer of data collection, which it may be legally obligated to carry out, writing that in addition to the items listed in our privacy policy, in extreme cases, ProtonMail may also be obligated to monitor the IP address, which are being used to access the ProtonMail accounts, which are engaged in criminal activities. It's the IP monitoring component which has caused such an alarm among privacy advocates now, and no small criticism of Proton's marketing claims as a user privacy-centric company. It has faced particular criticisms for marketing claims of providing anonymous email and for the wording of the caveat in its transparency disclosure, where it talks about IP logging only occurring in extreme criminal cases. And these French folks obviously feel that they are not an extreme criminal case.
They're squatters, the worst kind.
Yeah. At the same time, Proton does provide users with an onion address, meaning activists concerned about tracking can access its encrypted email service using Tor, which makes it harder for their IP address to be tracked. As I was saying before, the real solution is to use a VPN-ish, a way to obfuscate your IP address, and then you wouldn't have to worry about Proton coughing up your IP address to the Swiss authorities. So ProtonMail is providing tools for users to protect themselves against IP monitoring, as well as protect the contents of their emails from being snooped on, even though its own service can, in certain circumstances, be turned into an IP monitoring tool by the Swiss law enforcement. In the backlash around the revelation of the IP logging of the French activist, Proton's boss, Yen, said via Twitter that ProtonMail will be providing a more prominent link to its onion address on its website. And they say they're updating this today to link to our Tor page. Proton does also offer a VPN service of its own, and Yen has claimed that Swiss law does not allow it to log its VPN users' IP addresses. So it's interesting to speculate whether the activists might have been able to evade the IP logging if they had been using both Proton's end-to-end encrypted email and its VPN service.
Are they seriously using this as an upsell provision? Like just saying, hey, look at this.
Yeah, well, you got to monetize it somehow. And
if essentially you might be arrested by your authorities with stuff. Pay for our extended package and maybe this will work. Will it work? We don't know.
So somebody
No,
asks,
just to be clear about.
one second, Charles. Just a final thought here. Somebody asked Andy Yen, the boss of Proton, on Twitter yesterday, or still today if you're in America. It says, one more question: does the on legal demand IP logging also apply to your VPN service? He responds on Twitter, no. There's no legal basis for logging VPN under current Swiss law. Go ahead, Charles.
So yes, just for those who are uninitiated, there was a story recently about how the CIA was using Switzerland and basically had promised all this encryption technology that was based in Switzerland and it was in fact owned by the CIA. And I think people are really kidding themselves if they don't think that that kind of thing goes on all the time in Switzerland. And just as a final point on this, the NSA can scoop up pretty much everything on the planet and does routinely. And it's really only after you get detected on some other matter that they then run and they look back at the tape. So a lot of this stuff about ProtonMail and whether it's actually real privacy or whatever is really about the ad, being private against the Google ads, which is like notoriously hacked by different powers. So, I mean, you will be detected if you're trying to do anything with ProtonMail. It's just like, it's pretty, by the US. I assume other countries have sufficient kind of mechanisms here as well.
So okay, but that's important to basically acknowledge, because when people say essentially you can have privacy, you just have to pay for it, that's something that, well, it's only against certain parties or in only certain circumstances.
Privacy does not really exist anymore. The question is privacy to whom and how much work will they have to do to get you. But I mean, I have worked on cases with law enforcement where all of the Proton emails were very readily handed over. So people can say whatever they want about this, but my lived experience on this is different. Now, it's much harder for the U.S. government to get it, particularly for criminal prosecutions. Now, this is criminal prosecutions versus intelligence gathering, which are two different groups in the U.S. But it's much harder than, say, getting access to your Gmail account or your God help you AOL account. But it's still very doable and very easy if you reach the threshold.
So it's a question of how much paperwork people are willing to file on things. It's like, are you worth the paperwork?
Yes. So it says in the article, it says, the Andy Yen from Proton says, if a user was using a Tor or a Proton VPN, we would have been able to provide an IP to the Swiss authorities, but it would be the IP of the VPN server, not the actual user's, actual IP address where they're located, or it would be the IP address of the Tor exit node if you're using Tor. So basically, he's saying, please use our paid services for Proton VPN or Tor, so that when Switzerland forces us to hand over an IP address, we can cheekily hand over an IP address that isn't as helpful and not your legitimate IP address. We do protect against this threat model via our Onion site, protonmail.com/Tor. He added, in general, though, unless you are based 15 miles offshore in international waters, it is not possible to ignore court orders. True. Well, or you engineer a system that is truly decentralized and isn't tied to a geography, which,
No, the U.S. government doesn't put up with that.
Yeah, so, they don't. I know they don't like it. They'll come after you, but then you're in the Pirate Bay scenario of, if you set yourself up acknowledging who you are, they will come and they will arrest you and force you to shut the thing down. You would have to do it in the Satoshi Nakamoto fully pseudonymous format of building it from scratch without an ID. And it'd be interesting if there was such an email system, and they would do their damnedest to shut it down. This is why I keep going back to the Pirate Bay of one of the things that has withstand and still continues to trade all kinds of crazy shit on the Pirate Bay that Hollywood, despite their decades of wrath to the issue. The Swiss legal system, while not perfect, does provide a number of checks and balances, and it's worth noting that even in this case, approval from these authorities in 2 countries was required. And that's a fairly high bar, which presents most, but not all, abuse of the system.
This is 2 pieces of paperwork for the rubber stamp courts.
Exactly right. In a public response on Reddit, Proton also writes that it is deeply concerned about the case, reiterating that it was unable to contest the order in this instance. The prosecution in this case seems quite aggressive, it added. Unfortunately, this is a pattern we have increasingly seen in recent years around the world, for example, in France, where terror laws are inappropriately used. There it is. We will continue to campaign against such laws and abuses.
Keep in mind, what's great about this is because so many of these data systems and technical systems are like all interlinked with each other, especially with the legal stuff. It means that if any one of the legal systems in any one of the countries essentially has says, well, but terrorism or but children or but local politicians, less majesty kind of laws gets used, all of a sudden all the other ones are now vulnerable to the same thing. This is the legal loophole that allows Five Eyes to spy on domestic citizens with stuff. Is they go, oh, it's not ours, it's someone else's. So it's like, oh yeah, that's the counterterrorism stuff that we're getting from ProtonMail for France, apparently over there with stuff. But well, we're using it for real estate developers and squatters, and they might be communists. I don't know I haven't looked too much of the details of the case, but I'm just saying we're going to see more of these as you start having more and more exotic legal regulations start popping in for saying we should have our own domestic Twitter and we need to have domestic regulation around that, or we need to have our own domestic e-commerce things as you bring up here constantly on tech news around the world. You're going to see a very exotic menagerie of all these different variations with custom regulations that want to have the ability to subpoena or do e-discovery on things way far away. And because most of the legal precedents around these have been kind of sidestepped a little bit because you've essentially only had a small number of places to serve up the papers. Like Microsoft has a fortune of lawyers. Their sole job is just almost like a little embassy, essentially, just to respond to all the requests there. Google has their own equivalent, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be fascinating seeing how all these legal groups intersect with each other when it's not just the tech giants, but every single other basically endpoint becomes a place to serve papers for as governments discover all these juicy data points for starting out their own domestic programs. So it's going to be fascinating to see them all intersect with each other.
I mean, you're going to see a lot more because the U.S. and our European allies and the Brits are kind of pissed off about how Switzerland's been used as basically a dumping ground for all of the shady, dirty Russian money. And that's becoming an increasing issue for the U.S. And that I think what's happening here with France pressuring Switzerland is very much, the French doing the bidding of the U.S. I sent Tyler an article earlier, but it's from a while back. I mean, this is the Washington Post headline from November 2020. Swiss report reveals new details on CIA spying operation. So what's starting to happen clearly in Switzerland is that the Swiss authorities are basically taking the position of basically saying, like, look, we're going to have to just disclose that this stuff is countries and governments asking for this data. And I know Chris mentioned this Five Eyes stuff. While it is true that America can't, in theory, spy on American citizens, what typically happens is that, we'll go over to the British and the British will spy on the Americans, or we'll spy on the Brits, and then people will, in the sort of private contractor world, share files, and that's sort of how these things are done.
Okay, so that's the first story of the day. The second one is just a carryover from yesterday that Apple Watch Series 7 says the Apple Watch Series 7 will be announced alongside the new iPhone, almost certainly on a week from today, in which we will live stream the new iPhone launch along with the Apple Watch launch. And let's pray to sweet Jesus they reveal their AR VR headset, although that's no longer expected to happen this time, but sometime soon. But they will certainly talk about AR in the new iPhone, because it's known that they're going to have an improved LiDAR camera on the new iPhone. And so the next article after that is from the New York Times. It says, an analysis, mining Bitcoin uses 91 terawatt hours of electricity annually, which represents about half of 1% of all of the electricity consumed globally, or 7 times Google's total usage each year, and grew 10x in the past 5 years. And then I will tweet this out now. And of course, the question is, what percentage of that electricity is green or dirty. In 2009, you could mine 1 Bitcoin using a setup like your home computer. Today, you need a room full of specialized machines, each costing thousands of dollars. And the amount of household electricity required would be 9 years worth. Put in terms of a typical home electricity bill, about $12,000 of electricity to mine 1 Bitcoin, which today is worth about $50,000. And this is a really interesting point because a dear friend of mine, Sam, who had Sam Cole, who's a Brit but lives in Sweden, did one of the first big Bitcoin mining operations globally, but he did it out of Scandinavia in the northern part of Sweden, where energy is very cheap and you have it's very cold, and you can even sell the heat generated from the facility to the city. And in fact, the whole city he was based in was heated by his factory. And he was the largest consumer of energy in all of Scandinavia for his Bitcoin mining operation. But when the price of Bitcoin dropped down to $300 around 2012-ish, it basically made mining impossible. And this is the great example where you have to factor how much does it cost you to mine it in terms of sheer electricity. It costs about $12,000 today to mine a Bitcoin, and a Bitcoin today is worth $50,000. Well, a Bitcoin a month ago was actually about $30,000. And if the price of Bitcoin drops below 12,000, well, then everyone will stop mining Bitcoins instantly, because it will not be, you'll lose money on every Bitcoin that you mine.
That is a great line of thought, Tyler. I'd never occurred. And if you look at
this is what happened to my buddy Sam Cole. Was basically the price of Bitcoin when it dropped down to $300. Well, that was his cost of mining. So it was no longer, he had to sit on the sidelines for a year with a factory, with employees and all this, and he ended up having to sell the company, and then shortly after he sells the company, boom, it jumps up to $1,000, and he was like, ah, shit, so it was
So maybe this is a good thing, because there's these whales that have all that Bitcoin money with things. Maybe they can use this to fund essentially like energy breakthroughs. Like we've talked about fusion's impact on like environment and space travel and everything else, but I think we're missing the real question of what will be the impact of fusion breakthroughs on Bitcoin mining prices. I mean, maybe we could just have like the fusion fund, funded by the Bitcoin billionaires, and they can basically, if you've got unlock cheap energy for everyone, that can fund all sorts of fun projects for that.
Yeah, I think you need the resources of a state to really do that kind of thing. I mean, this is kind of like when you have a situation where oil prices are too volatile, right? When your source of energy is too variable, it makes it impossible for you to invest at the capital requirements necessary to really do this in a serious way.
Well, you're trying to actually make money with things. I mean, a lot of Bitcoin people are just in it for the lulz. I mean, the Sandy factor of, you got $1 billion worth of Bitcoin essentially 1 year. Essentially, 10 years ago, that was, pizza prices. I'm kind of wondering essentially if, that same sort of, willingness to take risks might apply to essentially some very highly speculative, random energy projects. Okay, I mean, that's crazy things.
I bought a Honda Fit brand new in Bitcoin in 2012. Which was about $17,000 at the time in Bitcoin, and you can just do the math.
Very expensive.
You can just do the math on that now. But yeah, I do think the problem, I think with a lot of these articles about the price of energy and its effect on crypto and mining and all of that, a lot of that is really just psychological warfare on the part of the U.S. state and other interests that want to stop people from mining Bitcoin, and basically they view Bitcoin as basically an attack on the dollar, which of course it is.
So
that's why they need to all move to, was it El Salvador, was it, or is the other one?
Yeah, I mean, El Salvador is the money laundering capital of Central America, and there's quite a number of countries that do that, and it's not a coincidence that they also declared themselves, accepting, the legal tender of Bitcoin. They also accept the legal tender of dollars too, if I recall.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. Essentially, all the PR stuff is like the IMF is like saying, no, we don't want you to have the Bitcoins, and we have all that. All right, Tyler, just watch that. I just basically hijacked the whole thing so we can talk about fusion and Bitcoin. Sorry, next headline.
It's all right. But just for people's dinner party conversation talking points, this New York Times article has some really interesting graphs and comparisons where it compares the amount of energy of Bitcoin equal to about the state of Finland, which is 5.5 million people, or the state of Washington in terms of energy usage. So the next big article, per Chris's point here, the next one is a Harvard study details how automated hiring systems now used by 99% of Fortune 500 companies exclude more than 10 million qualified workers in the U.S. from hiring decisions because the people using these systems don't know the difference between a data entry person and a computer and what was the word? Computer developer. So they're checking the wrong boxes when they're making their the scanning, the automation flow, and they tick a box that says, "Do you want this person to have computer development skills?" And then you check yes, when actually you were just wanting somebody to do data entry, and now basically nobody qualifies for the work. Because they on their resume didn't list that they are a computer developer when really what you wanted was a data entry person. And so this Harvard study basically, and this is being reported from the Wall Street Journal, basically the developers of these systems need to make it easier for complete newbies to use their tools. And the newbies themselves need to learn a little more geeky language, and it'll get ironed out. But a little rough automating things, giving powerful tools to people who are not used to using tech tools. You're always going to have frictions. I speak from firsthand experience trying to build apps for restaurant owners. Dear sweet Jesus, I don't wish that hell on my worst enemy, because those folks cannot figure out how to do a reply all on an email. So good luck building them an app that they can feel confident using.
Yeah, I mean, the tech adoption among these different industries is something like I'm seeing this right now with some stuff we've been doing with morticians and funeral home directors, and like there's definitely like a wildly different tech adoption based upon the personality types of the types of people that go into certain industries, and some are very tech forward and some are not.
Yeah, some are tech phobic, and I would say the restaurant industry notably attracts tech phobic people. And so it's very, very, very difficult and very challenging to build them tools simple enough. So the next one up is a look at the substrates that connect chips to circuit boards and how years of underinvestment in substrate manufacturing has worsened the global chip shortage, from the Wall Street Journal. Sourcing and low margin part called the substrate has become a priority for Intel, Nvidia, and AMD. And boy, let's skip over that. That's even a little too geeky for us.
Okay, just the short version is decades of underinvestment and just basically saying, hey, we could do this. Yeah, but that would be different. And then skipping over all those infrastructure upgrades, and they go, oh no, surprise, surprise. If you don't do that for forever, you lose the market. This is TikTok cycle. They literally did this whole thing saying, we'll just basically innovate on, maybe in the off years or, every other release. And then they started missing those cycles, and then they got way behind, and yeah, it's and then they say, "Oh no, this is a thing. Government bails out as a thing." Oddly enough, on the government side, they have been asking for actually research support for a long while. The amounts that were asked for in the past were like there was a big deal saying we're going to put like 100 million in this or 200 million. It's like we really need to put like like 3, 5, 10 billion in. That was in the past. Now they're doing on a crash course schedule because it affects geopolitics of which countries and which islands get affected by things. So it's crazy watching them do essentially going, oh crap, more, build them faster, build them factories faster.
The next one's from the Wall Street Journal, that one of China's biggest tech companies, one of their big five, you could think of it like the Google-ish of China, huge company called JD.com. It's essentially e-commerce is their whole game, but they do a lot of other stuff. But now JD, well, let me put it this way. In the past few months, we had the CEOs of China's biggest tech companies resigning, namely one of the co-founders of TikTok, the founder of Alibaba, and Pinduoduo. These are two of those. Alibaba and Pinduoduo are two of the fastest growing companies in the history of planet Earth. And that is not an exaggeration. That's literally factually true. Pinduoduo most notably. So it grew to surpass Alibaba as a 5-year-old company. So, and we should look up the market cap of Pinduoduo. It should be approaching around $1 trillion. Some getting up close to that. That just to give you a reference point. In 5 years, just for context, it's taken even Americans' biggest tech companies, in Apple's case, 20 years to get there. Just so you get an idea of how fast these companies grew and how big they grew and how quickly. And so the people leading these companies are, the Elon Musks of Asia, basically. And so you had Alibaba, Pinduoduo, and TikTok. Again, one of the fastest growing apps in the history of the planet Earth. So they all resigned in the past few months. And now there's another one, JD.com, one of the other dragons of tech out of Asia, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. JD says their founder and CEO, Richard Liu, will step back from day-to-day operations and focus on finger painting with his other friends from Pinduoduo and Alibaba and TikTok. And of course, it's because of the they're not even. Why even lie in the headline and say that it's he's going to focus on philanthropy or whatever? No, he's stepping down for the same reason that they all did, which is all of this tech crackdown stuff. I wish a journalist, and again, there's so many good tech investigative journalist points to be done. Thus far, no tech journalist has managed to do a sit down, even off the record, like kind of secretly with these the tech titans of China, to really get their perspective off the record. So you could get a handful of them, like 6 of them, and just say, listen, this is all off the record. We're not going to say who named, the journal. If this could really only be
Chatham
done.
House rules, like that's one thing for Western stuff, and in China they'll get you a little bit more of a harsher treatment.
No person who's worth over about $50 million in China can speak at all to the press
on the record. I know, but they would need to come.
Not even off the record. Not even off the record. Their phones, their comms,
yep,
like where they go. These are some of the most monitored people by their state.
True.
Of anywhere in the world. I mean, and I went to school with some of these people and their kids, and like their children are monitored in the U.S. like to a degree that would shock people if they really kind of understood.
There was a great article in ProPublica basically covering overseas, essentially people with money essentially from out of China with things, covering essentially they call them like the Fox essentially is where they it's Fox Hunt or something like that, where they basically would round up people from overseas and operate with openly in America and other countries, basically to convince them to come back home, and where there's even though essentially ostensibly they've left China. That's something that they use essentially ostensibly to for money laundering is the ostensible thing, but basically it means if you're over a certain wealth level and you got out of China late, you're never basically out of there. Essentially, your money stays there. You're going to be pulled back in, and it's crazy. But there's a ProPublica article on this recently that was really fascinating, and they covered a lot of this in depth.
Okay, so the next one's from Financial Times. Speaking of China, you have Didi in China, which is China's Uber, which is even far bigger than Uber because Didi is widely used in China. And Didi has a rival now in China called Cao. So Didi's ride-hailing rival, Cao Mobility, which is owned by Geely. Geely's becoming a real powerhouse. And Geely is run by what is very known in China as the Elon Musk of China. The guy who runs Geely, in fact, says about himself, I am the Elon Musk of China. And this guy is literally copying Elon Musk in every possible way. He went into making EVs. He's now going into launching rockets. He wants to put an internet satellite system. He literally just is whatever Elon does, this guy does. And he's not even, ashamed about it. He's just very open about it. He just wants to be Elon Musk for Asia. So, and he's doing amazingly well out. By the way, he bought Volvo out of Scandinavia. And he's going very big on EVs with Volvo. Volvo's quite a leader in being the one. They expect to be one of the first companies that were traditionally a combustion car company to become fully electric, I think by 2025, if I remember the headline correctly. So Geely,
Depends on whether or not Toyota intervenes fast enough.
yeah, Geely is now launching, or has launched, a competitor to Didi. And the headline today is they've just raised about $600 million from Chinese state-owned funds. So we heard last week, maybe 4 days ago, that Didi itself, there was rumors, sources, according to, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that Didi was likely to be kind of taken over by a Beijing-based state agency was going to acquire Didi. And that was the headline. But it's Beijing based, so that's not national level in the way that they were phrasing it. It was like state level, not national level. In this case, it sounds like Geely raising $600 million from Chinese state-owned funds that might be national level. So interesting to see how Cao will play into the whole Didi and the state ownership of these Ubers of China. And by the way, also the deliveries of we've talked about at length many times here about the autonomous vehicle delivery networks are going to play an incredibly powerful role in the economy and in the data of the future. So whoever is delivering all of the goods and products and services and people throughout the city, governments traditionally want to own the distribution of how people get around. That's normally kind of a public utility, hence public transportation networks. And if that's becoming privatized, as it is in many places through the likes of Uber, and especially when that becomes autonomous, and it also includes the delivery of food and products that you order through e-commerce, I can see why China would want to have a controlling stake in that delivery network of autonomous vehicles. The next one is from TechCrunch, that Bangladesh company called ShopUp, which aims to digitize neighborhood stores in India, raises $75 million. And here we go with the digitization of neighborhood stores. And it's
Tyler's like, I'm glad I'm not doing that.
And then the next one is a look at the growing movement of self-hosting, a practice where dedicated hobbyists run their own internet services at home on hardware they own. And this, again, it kind of relates back to that Proton email situation of, it says, meet the self-hosters, taking back the internet one server at a time. Tired of big tech monopolies, a community of hobbyists is taking their digital lives off the cloud and into and onto do-it-yourself hardware that they control. It's no secret that a small handful of enormous companies dominate the internet as we know it, but the internet didn't always have services with billions of users, and the world hasn't entirely died out. However, through a growing movement of dedicated hobbyists known as self-hosters, the dream of decentralized internet lives on at a time when surveillance, censorship, and increasing scrutiny of big tech has created widespread mistrust in large internet platforms. Self-hosting is a practice that pretty much describes itself: running your own internet service, typically on hardware you own and have at home. This contrasts with relying on products from large tech companies which the user has no direct involvement in. A self-hoster controls it all, from the hardware used to the configuration of the software. The problem is, of course, the second you connect that to an internet connection, you've opened yourself up to, the eyes of the state, essentially. So it doesn't really much matter that you're hosting it yourself, unless you put in really strong cryptographic kind of defense. Then you might be able to build a Proton email server of your own, and then the government would have to ask you for your IP address, but they would already have it depending on how you connected to the internet. So again, you're in a similar scenario. But anyway, it's an interesting article about how it's the point I was making earlier about hardcore geeks are starting to no longer trust big tech and are now trying to take control back into their own hands. And you see this on the networking front with the likes of the Helium network, which is, they're calling themselves the People Network, and it's a decentralized, people-owned global internet provider, connectivity provider. And it will be very interesting to see how states deal with that. Based on the way that it's engineered and architected, will states be able to force them to hand over IP addresses to people who are running their own servers in their own houses or whatever, what have you? So it's going to get interesting.
Tyler, would the Bitcoin maximalists be very close to Helium because it's in their interests?
No. Yeah, I mean, philosophically, yes. Philosophically, yes. There's people are starting to develop a sensitivity and realize that it might be in their interest to decouple themselves, detether themselves from the state-controlled entities, because one of the things that's happening, as Blodgie points out in his interview with in that podcast that just was posted a few days ago with Sam Harris, is he really makes the point, and I think Charles would agree, that what's happening in the US at the moment with big tech versus the government is the government's basically going to force big tech to become incredibly friendly on a data level with the state. So the US is going to have everything that they want in terms of access to knowing who's doing what and where and how on their systems. That's going to be part of the capitulation and concessions that are granted in how big tech is going to have to become very friendly with the U.S. government, because these are U.S. companies. Just like the social media companies in India are now forced to do whatever India wants them to do, just like China's tech companies, God knows how efficient that whole process was. China said, you are now, all of your data belongs to us. And they all said, of course. Absolutely. Yes, sir. End of discussion. Done. And that process that took about 10 seconds in China is going to take about 3 or 4 years to play out in a much more obfuscated, nebulous, backhanded, litigious, manner in the U.S. in a way that doesn't expose that the U.S. actually has acquired control in the back doors of all of these tech companies, where in China it's just understood and known and just transparent as all get out. I mean, China says we now have all the data of all the big tech companies. Thank you very much. End of discussion. Nice meeting. Come back. We'll call you back next week when we have other demands. And in the U.S., it's this super slow, lethargic, geriatric, senators on Capitol Hill trying to figure out, how tech even works, and that's going to take a few years, and then they got to figure out why is data important, and that's going to take 2 more years, and it's just this incredibly slow, lethargic process. But at the end of the day, the net end result is similar, which is the U.S. government's going to force the big tech companies to do everything they wanted them to do. We want you to preemptively look for child abuse images on all of your networks. We want you to preemptively look for any terrorism happening on all these networks. We want you to preemptively look for any bad actions from China or Russia on your networks. We want you to do, here's our list of demands, and we're technologically inept. So we need your tech expertise to actually implement these controls and demands that we have. And they will. And that's why Amazon itself this week said, we're now going to be scanning for the first time ever, we're letting you know, we're now going to be scanning for content that doesn't fit with our values. Well, what the fuck are your values? You're a goddamn fucking cloud. You're a piece of technology. What the fuck are you talking about your values? What is the value of an email server? What the fuck are you talking about, Amazon? The values of your cloud? And what they're really talking about is the values of their new boss, which is, some agency that you probably have not heard of in the U.S., who's now telling them, we're now going to scan everything on AWS. We're going to we control the database now. Thank you very much. Similar to China, but just obfuscated in a winky nudge kind of way, that it's not, there's no grand headline that says America now controls what's happening on digitally in terms of data on every computer in their geography. Well, yeah, every government wants to do this now.
Well, some companies will be made an example of, though, in the U.S. context, just as they are in China. Like Google and Facebook are clearly going to be made an example of, whereas Amazon and Apple are tripping over themselves to help the U.S. government. Which, by the way, I highly recommend people listen to that Blodgie interview. I have the exact opposite view of Blodgie on pretty much every topic. And we used to be much closer, much more friendly. But I think, Blodgie, I like Blodgie, but he was born in India. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that. There have been many American citizens, but he has his own strategy around investing around the decline of the U.S., what he perceives as the decline of the U.S., and I don't believe that the U.S. is going to decline. I think that it's actually necessary for us to requisition a lot of these companies. And in the case of things like 23andMe or Ancestry, I favor the U.S. government actually coming in and cleaning out all of the foreign investors in these companies and sort of quasi-nationalizing those too. So, and I favor that for Clubhouse too. I don't see why Clubhouse should be allowed to have as many foreign investors as it does. And you'll see, by the way, the word here is CFIUS. You'll see a lot more use of CFIUS, which is the committee. I think it's like Foreign Investments U.S. I forget exactly what it stands for, but basically it's a division of Treasury, which basically looks into the foreign money that is behind a lot of tech investing. And that's going to come much more into play as time goes on during the Biden administration.
Back to this headline. Yeah, one second, Johan. This headline that we're reading about the self-hosters taking back the internet one server at a time. It's the same. Yeah, to your point, Dave. It's just like the Bitcoin folks want to take back currency. One coin at a time, and it's about power essentially. If you boil it all down, it's about control and power and privacy and data. And is it possible to operate technologically in a way that is non-compliant with governments in their sovereign territories? And generally it's not. And that's why that ProtonMail CEO said, unless you're operating 12 miles off of the international waters, he's exactly right, because you have to go 12 miles off the coast. You're still in their you're not in international waters until you get 12 miles off the coast, according to the UN.
And then you're a pirate, and which means
well, now you know why China built sandbars in the South China Sea. But and I imagine it won't be too long before Peter Thiel or others start doing the same. Because how much would it cost to build a sandbar, 12 miles off the coast of, someplace? So,
have you ever seen Michael Saylor whenever he talks and the pirate ship behind him?
No.
That's what I was thinking of whenever. Oh yeah, he's got a beautiful pirate ship, which is really cool. I kind of imagine this thing took thousands of hours to build, but it was what I was thinking of whenever you guys were talking about them being in the waters. The other thought I had was, the obfuscation of the email or the IP address. Like a simple VPN wouldn't do that. Like, would it to completely obfuscate it? Like, you'd have to get something better to do
the Tor network is kind of a more optimized obfuscator for IP addresses, and that's why it was mentioned in that ProtonMail article.
That was the thing I was to bring up. The self-hosters nowadays, they usually put up some cheap computer with a few virtual machines on and put them up on Tor. So they actually have their blogs on Tor. They have everything. So it's very, 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 very hard to actually find who's behind a dedicated server on the Onion network. So if you're going to try to host your own blog, if you want to publish something, put up a simple web server with basic text, because it will get very slow when you run it over Tor. And a Tor node, and you're protected as long as you use Onion links and have all your surfing going out through that as well. You will be very hard to find. You will still be possible to find, but it will be very, very hard. It's only the largest organizations in the world that probably can do it at all.
Johan, in that case, is it they start employing social kind of investigation, like in the same way that Satoshi Nakamoto, like the hints around the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto is the times of day that he was posting and the language he was using and all these other tea leaves and smoke signals that are indicators of where he might be. It's quite understood that he's based in the UK, for example, based on interesting anecdotal observations, right? And those will obviously be employed in tracking down individuals who use the methodologies you're describing.
Yeah. So if you're going to do something really, really shady, you better do it really, really good, and ask a couple of very good people at this, and then you will probably be able to do it for a couple of years. But the time you will get caught eventually. So there is no way of hiding. There is no way.
Because there's starting to be AIs that can analyze text and in a way, and even the metadata of the others, that they can find interesting little signals that seemingly threads that can't be pulled on that can be. For example, if Satoshi Nakamoto had been a blogger, a prolific blogger prior to doing Bitcoin, they could analyze the speech style of his white paper across all previous blogs on the internet and realize, oh, there's a very high correlation of interesting little grammar signals to identify this individual based on, the two spaces after the period and the kind of sequence of verb conjugations, and it gets very there's tools that can do these things that people don't realize exist. They're almost like technical magic tricks.
Yeah, even typing on devices, like a lot of we type in a very specific way, which I think a lot of people don't realize. I mean, without giving away too much, like the question is just how fast it will be before you're caught, and how much and how many resources are dedicated to. It's just like, the stuff that the NSA has and that the FBI increased. It's really good. Like, you will be beaten. Like, don't try this at home. And on the VPN stuff, there's a lot of evidence that some of the VPN companies are actually fronts of different intelligence agencies. So I wouldn't be so surprised if, the VPN you think you're using to communicate, covertly is in fact not what it appears to be.
Okay, so we've went through the popular headlines. I have a bunch of nice tweets that people have been tweeting in as per usual. And now is everybody's chance to share their favorite headline since we met last. I'll start with Evan sent in one about California droughts with photos of kind of gut-wrenching former lakes that have now become ponds, and where the boats in the lakes are now competing for what's left of the lake. They're going to start soon crashing into each other in the bottom of this draining bathtub of a lake. Lake Oroville leads to historic lows in California as the climate crisis continues. So thank you for that one, Evan. And then he sends in another one from the Daily Mail that solar-powered AI cameras now patrol remote crossings of the U.S. border wall. The cameras, designed by 28-year-old Oculus founder Palmer Luckey, detect movement within a 2-mile radius and transmit the data to agents for review. And that's his company. Remind me, the Anduril, is it not, Charles?
Yes, Anduril. Yep. Flame of the West from Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. And basically America, to patrol its Mexican border, if you come up with an interesting cost-effective solution, you could get them as a client, and they have a budget to spend a little bit bigger than your average Fortune 500 company. So not a bad customer to have. But that was from Daily Mail out of the UK, talking about Anduril, which is you could think of it like a startup, and now startups are getting into the border defense business, and that could be globally a really interesting business, and especially here in Thailand, where we had a huge wave of Delta variant COVID came in because our neighbors in Myanmar were suffering a military coup, and they were fleeing Burma into Thailand across our rather porous border, and the Thais were furious and trying to stop the incoming Burmese fleeing the coup, and they were bringing Delta variant with us, and now we've suffered an incredible cost economically as a result of Delta, which we could have spent a tenth of that money on securing that border. So now you see the importance of having,
I would just say, DHS, which is, funding a lot of this work with Palmer's company and with Clearview, Clearview under Joe Biden, has gotten 3 times the contracts it had under Trump, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, there's this use of technology on borders to deal with identification, to deal with knowing who's coming and who's going, which is going to be a trend, I think, throughout the West generally. In fact, there's situations where Anduril will identify, they'll take video of somebody's face, and then the CBP agent will run Clearview on that person's face to know who they are. And that's how some of the major traffickers are getting busted on the U.S. border.
Okay, so anyone with a hot headline they want to share?
Yeah, I don't know if this qualifies as tech news, but I don't know if everyone knows Guinea President Kondou has been thrown out with coup d'etat, so by the military, and a lot of African leaders are really upset. Because photos has been shown all over the TV being, held up by some soldiers. And there was a big hope in Africa that coups has been disappearing, even though, he has been accused of a lot of things before. There has been a lot of pictures in the social media showing him captured by the military officers, and photos and videos were shared, showing the Guinea, jubilation of celebration on the street. Some of the things he has been accused of was that he has changed the constitution, as usual. Sometimes that happens in Africa, for extending his, his presidency, as well as corruption. He apparently increased his salary, but not the soldiers. So yeah, that's the big news. Even the AU is really complaining, but some are saying that in 2021, Africa has been gone beyond the coup and try to solve the problems with other things. But there has been some attempts before, like this year in Niger, and 2 of them recently in Mali. So this is the big news in Africa now.
Thank you, Massey.
Both the Mali leader and the Ghanaian leader were both trained by the U.S. government and the French, just for those who are paying attention.
Yep.
In fact, I
Sometimes.
remember
Yeah, go ahead.
I had dinner with the guy who took over Guinea, I guess it would have been in 2017, and he was going through AfricaCom at the time. And I remember he was like 6'6" and just a huge man. And apparently, they're making strongmen like they used to. There are photos out there of him, I think, also being trained with U.S. Army forces.
Yeah, those are the problems that Africa has, really, because of, as you know, the Cold War, because of the fighting, the East versus the West. U.S. was really on the ground getting rid of really good leaders like Nkrumah from Ghana and others, and putting crazy people like what's his name in Zaire, who wears that crazy hat and has been looting the entire country. So those are the things that we are still dealing with. And I don't know how many people know Margaret Thatcher's son, Mark Thatcher, I think, was accused of, even arrested, being mercenary and organizing a coup. That was a while back, but Africa is still paying for being trained, and then now being bad leaders, and coups is still continuing in 2021. But that's the news here. So yeah, I'm done speaking.
Okay. I've got a whole bunch more good ones here, but if you're on stage, you're more than encouraged to find your favorite headline today, because being Labor Day in America, my service for basically tweeting is kind of low, and then the service I use to find all of the best headlines is taking the day off. So Evan sent in one from BMW, where they have now revealed their 100% recyclable electric car, and you can get a look at it in the tweet I just sent to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, and they're calling it a recyclable EV car, and a really cool looking design at that. And then, speaking of cars, Ted Abramson just sent in, Volkswagen unveils its new ID concept car that previews its upcoming $24,000 electric car. VW unveiled today its new ID Life electronic car concept at the IAA Mobility Show in Munich. The German automaker presented it, and it looks gorgeous, I have to say. And for $24,000 for a proper, it looks like it's an SUV in its shape. Really beautiful design, and for $24,000, and it also has a yoke steering wheel similar to Tesla, interestingly, and it looks like it uses your phone as the kind of dashboard, believe it or not. And you can see this from the Tech News Twitter account. Oh my God, it even has a full pop-up screen. This is wild. Your windshield turns into an actual screen, like a high fidelity screen. Very cool. For $24,000, that seems like quite a value. And it has flush pop-out door handles, again, very Tesla inspired, but again, the shape of an SUV. So thank you for that one, Ted. Ted also sends in, on the Tesla point, that a headline that says Tesla could get over $1 billion in government funding for battery factory in Germany. The German government is finalizing a subsidy package that could give Tesla over $1 billion in government funding for its new battery factory outside of Berlin, at Gigafactory Berlin. Germany's newspaper reports that Tesla could be the biggest benefactor or beneficiary of the new program and secure as much as $1.3 billion, as Germany has, funds to inspire, electrification. And then the companies apply for it. Tesla's in kind of pole position to benefit from that massive fund. Apparently they have a $5 billion fund, something like that. So makes sense. The next one from Cheryl, also from Germany, from DW.com, which is my favorite publication out of Europe. And Germany warns Russia over cyber attacks ahead of election. Berlin says it has reliable information that a series of attempts to get hold of lawmakers' personal details can be linked to the Russian-linked hacker group. And indeed, Russia is obsessed with elections and hacking elections, as anyone in Eastern Europe knows very well. And as Americans might have someday find out themselves. And as Russian citizens know very well. The Kremlin is very keen on hacking elections, and rather than go in and assassinate leaders, why not just vote them out by hacking the election process? And if you can hack a government, and including their election hardware, then you can control the futures of those states. And so there's an incredible incentive to be able to do this. And Putin, of all people, understands that. So something to keep in mind, and not at all a surprise that Germany is warning Russia, any country who's about to have an election, might be wise to do a paper-based election, knowing that it's very possible that the Russians have compromised their election machinery. And boy, did we not have an amazing call from the Biden team to mail in ballots this year? Did we not? And did not Donald Trump try to stop the United States Postal Service as a countermeasure? Stop the whole ability to mail in those ballots. And who mails in those ballots is the United States Postal Service. But they handle mail of all types, not just ballots. So boy, that's a real extreme countermeasure, is it not, to simultaneous to Biden asking everyone to mail in their ballots, Trump's shutting down the United States Postal Service to prevent precisely that from happening, jeopardizing all mail at the cost of stopping mail-in ballots, because Trump knows his best friend Vlad was going to assure his win by controlling the voting machines.
I think it's interesting too how those transitional measures on voter. I mean, it's interesting how those traditional measures that were used here. I mean, how do I put this? I would say, well, let's just put it this way: the first ever voting machine was invented by Thomas Alva Edison, and he found it very hard to get people to buy it, because what he found is that people liked to vote, have the results from the election, and then decide what the results were going to be in an informal manner. And it's interesting how in the US, vote by mail is strongly encouraged, but in France, it's illegal. And it's just kind of interesting because in the US, it's widely seen that our intelligence services and the sort of US Postal Service's mail fraud division, it's much more a deep state kind of thing. So it does make you wonder how many of these things are going to stay transitional, vote by mail, and how much they're going to become obligatory going forward. It's also interesting, too, how people got rid of the voter ID objections. Voter ID used to be racist, but now Stacey Abrams is calling for it. It's just kind of interesting how fast these things change.
So here's a really interesting one. Someone named Brian in the audience just sent in this one from the New York Post, that Texas, as you know, has their new abortion law. And this is just, here we are. Portland is kind of diametrically opposed to Texas on these kinds of issues. And so now Portland is cutting trade and travel with Texas amid abortion law outrage. The city of Portland announced it intends to ban trade and travel to the state of Texas in response to the state's new abortion law. Mayor Wheeler announced on Friday that the city council intends to vote on an emergency resolution on Wednesday to stop Portland's future procurement of goods and services from the city employee business and city employee business travel to the state of Texas. The resolution will be in effect until the state of Texas ends the law or it's overturned. It's not exactly clear what such a ban would look like. City legal counsel is currently evaluating the legal aspects of this proposal resolution. A release from the city council said the Portland City Council stands unified in its belief that all people should have the right to choose if and when they carry a pregnancy, and that the decisions they make are complex, difficult, and unique in their circumstances. The new law, called SB 8, was signed by Governor Greg Abbott in May. It bans all abortions, blah, blah, blah. Additionally, and uniquely, the law allows for private residence, blah, blah, blah. Portland City Council stands with the people who may one day face decisions about pregnancy, and we respect their right to make the best decisions for themselves. This is the most pernicious thing about the Texas law. It sort of creates a vigilante system, but I'm not aware of this previously. Is anyone else familiar with precedents of cities banning other cities or states based on rules and regulations that they pass?
Yeah, this started to happen a lot during the RFRA debate, which was about the religious freedom, law that was passed in Indiana. There was a lot of states that were retaliating and cities retaliating against Indiana for trying to pass that law. And I think that happened too in Georgia too, a while back after Georgia passed a sort of election integrity measure.
Yeah, and so if Portland is cutting trade and travel with Texas, why have no tech companies who have similar values done the same yet?
Well,
Because
Texas is the second largest state in the union.
correct.
I mean, good luck.
Right. Yet they Salesforce did withdraw all, they were canceling events and refusing to hire or build up a location in North Carolina or whatever it was when it passed a LGBTQ a bathroom law or something. And interesting to see when tech companies are willing to, make big announcements about how they're not cooperating with regulations that they find to be LGBTQ unfriendly. But when women, I imagine it will be interesting to see if any tech company stands up to Texas.
Well, they don't really have a choice because
Yep.
a lot of them have operations in Austin or
Yep.
want to have operations there.
Yep.
And it's also a state that has a 0% income tax, and it's one of the fastest growing states in the union. So I think they're
Yep.
kind of out of luck here.
Yeah.
It's Europe,
I think, by the
Tyler.
way, Florida.
Tyler, I was just going to say it's Europe. The US is turning into Europe now.
Well, Florida,
Tyler, there have been,
by the way,
there.
like next week, Florida's passing like a virtual carbon copy of the law. So we'll see how that works if you're boycotting the second and third largest states in the union.
Shahin?
I think it will happen. There have already been reports of companies canceling events in Austin, and there will be more coming. As much as these guys are big states, the opposition to what they've done is pretty strong as well.
There must have been, because there was a minor diaspora of geeks from the Bay Area to Austin recently. And those Californian, many of them women, must be rather dismayed that the place where they just bought a home has now passed this bill. It's why I would love for a journalist to go find such individuals and do video interviews. That would be fantastic journalism. So
they are more than dismayed. And also all the raft of Californians going to Texas and Massachusettsans and New Yorkers, they're also changing the politics in Texas.
Well, it might be because a lot of the Texans are not at all fond of the Californians coming into Texas and bringing their, blue state values with them. And this is a very clever way to kind of stop that diaspora or kind of inbound of, blue wave of immigration into Texas, which, by the way, because Texas is turning a bit purple. And if you continue to get people from New England and California coming into Texas, as they are doing, at some point it will turn Texas blue. So this is a really, perhaps, Charles, you having resided in Texas, are we to think that this possibly could be strategically to prevent that?
Well, I mean, this is designed for two purposes. One is to have, Governor Abbott be a contender for the presidency in 2024. Need a champion in 2024. So that's clearly why he's doing it and why DeSantis is, governor of Florida is following him. And then Abbott for years has basically tried to recruit all these tech companies to Texas. And he has said repeatedly that those companies are not going to change the politics of Texas. And people are like, yeah, we'll believe that when we see it. And this is a stress test of whether or not, the Texas voters are preeminent. And I should say Texas is a weird place. I mean, it's a place where like liberal Democrats own guns at one of the highest rates in the nation. It's also a place where this law, we don't yet know the popularity of it, but there's a lot of like centrist Democrat types who are, pro-life Democrats in Texas. And they don't have the same views on abortion that people do in, New York and California, which I should say, the New York and California laws are pretty extreme. I mean, you can essentially get an abortion up to birth in both of those states. And that's really just not the consensus position. Most Europeans won't probably realize this, but like, the European laws on abortion are actually, I think it's like first trimester, you can get an abortion, but like second, third, there have to be like severe restrictions on it. And that's just not the case in a lot of like major states in the US. So I think what's going to end up happening is it's going to go to the Supreme Court, or some version of it's going to end up in the Supreme Court. Probably the bounty system thing, which is just weird. And it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, and we'll see what ends up happening.
Okay. So other interesting headlines happening here. Ken sends in this one that a California bill, speaking of state bills, California bill could alter Amazon's labor practices. According to the New York Times, the bill would rein in production quotas at warehouses that critics say are excessive and force workers to forego bathroom breaks. And it would be amazing to find out if it's not, in fact, the robotics companies who are trying to force this bill through, because what you're going to do is force the automation of these factories if you're reducing the productivity of the humans in these factories. You're exacerbating your own demise. So
those are the golden journalist words, Tyler, right? Critics say, I want you to believe this.
Yes. Yeah,
it's fine.
We're fighting for the humans. We just want to make them less productive, but it's for their own benefit. Trust me. So another interesting headline. Speaking of Amazon, from Chris, he found this one from Business Insider that Jeff Bezos has reportedly invested in new anti-aging biotech startup. Altos Labs hopes to develop technology to reprogram human cells so they have the properties of stem cells, according to MIT. And a new company dedicated to finding out how to reverse the aging process has received funding from Jeff Bezos, Altos Labs.
Is this Anthony or Antonio Regalado who wrote the piece? Is that
written by Isabel Hamilton?
Okay, I don't know her.
It's from Business Insider, and it says, citing people briefed by the company, MIT Tech Review reported Altos Labs said Bezos was among its investors, and Bezos stepped down as CEO of Amazon. They don't have any additional information here, which shame on the journalist who could have easily called up the company and found out some interesting stuff. But scientist Shinya Yamanaka won the joint Nobel Prize in 2012 for demonstrating a technique in mice. Yamanaka will be joining Alto Labs as chair of its scientific advisory board. Although there are many hurdles to overcome, there's a huge potential, Yamanaka told MIT Tech Review in an email. Delaware state records show that the company was first incorporated in April. Who gives a shit?
The piece, by the way, the initial piece was published by Antonio Regalado in MIT Tech Review, and he has kind of a history of like oversexing his stories, sort of making them, a 13 when they should be like a 6 or a 7. So this is kind of a wait and see kind of thing. I think people are way overstating, what it means. But it is true that Amazon is going to move into genetics in the very near future. So maybe this is a harbinger of that.
Okay. And for those who don't know, if you want to know more about reversing aging, you should one of the most logical places to start is with David Sinclair's lab at Harvard, where he claims, and although we have no reason to doubt him, that he's effectively reversing the aging process in mice in his lab. And he hopes to, obviously his lab hopes to do human trials on this. And they believe it's a disease. He refers to it as a disease that can be quote unquote cured. So it's quite an interesting space. The next one is from Evan about a really cool technology that I happen to know a Swedish company doing this as well, but this headline is about a company called IFTL, which harvests power from colorless clear glass. And they're pleased to announce that they have successfully harvested power using virtually colorless clear glass, meaning buildings and your windows in your homes and cars and everywhere else can eventually replace solar panels. And so you can have skyscrapers of buildings that themselves are solar harvesters and provide their own energy. So it's a fantastic technological breakthrough. speaking of solar panels and whatnot, Evan sends in this one that covering parking lots with solar panels, providing shade, and generating electricity to charge electric cars. That Evan, what was sort of the point of this article? Do you recall? The environmental and economical benefits of solar are bigger than ever, and organizations can now share in the savings by installing solar covering over their parking lots. So covering parking lots with solar panels, basically, which makes sense because there's usually nothing above the cars. The cars don't mind being covered. Why not cover them with kind of solar awnings, as many tech campuses now do? Makes perfect sense. So the next one up is from Willie, who kind of on a related point. Willie joins us from the audience most days here, and the headline says from Ars Technica: 21st century storms are overwhelming 20th century cities. Infrastructure that wasn't built to handle warmer, wetter climate is increasingly risky. For every 1 degree, you get about a 7% more moisture in the air, and that means that you can have much heavier rainfall events. That is the downside. You're getting these flash floods that we're watching, that are becoming viral TikTok videos around Germany a month ago. They're happening in China. They're breaking dams. They're happening all over the place now, and they're just starting. They're going to get much worse. However, there is a silver lining to that rain cloud, which is, as humidity goes up, and it will go up as a result of climate change, more humid air, very humid air, you can do water extraction from humid air. And that could hopefully, if we see a boom in water harvesting from air, and I'm seeing it in the headlines that I'm reading, there's a lot of companies getting funded and a lot of projects happening where people are harvesting water from humid air, just anywhere that has more than 15% humidity. And as humidity continues to go up due to climate change, well, a lot more places can do water harvesting from air. So it's, of course, an energy issue as well. So you need to do that in a sustainable way. Evan sends in this one about vertical farm crops, where basically instead of using soil, after millennia of creating crops for outdoor agriculture, researchers are finally investing in creating seeds that can thrive without traditional soil, sunlight, or water. And indeed, the genetic engineered seeds, you can do hydroponic farming at scale that uses 1/10 the amount of water of normal soil farms. And you need no pesticides. So it can be done quote unquote organically, or at least pesticide free, as they're calling it, and using 1/10 the water. That's the important bit, because farms are running out of water. So turning to aeroponics and hydroponics makes all the sense in the world, especially using genetic modified seeds that are drought resistant. And then you get a double win, and you have plants that need half the water normally and 1/10 the water through hydroponics, and now you're getting down to 1/5, or 5% of the normal water required to grow most of the produce section in your supermarket. This seems to me like an inevitable reality, that we will need these GMO seeds of drought-resistant plants using hydroponics and aeroponics that require a fraction of the water needed from traditional farming. And you can see a photo of this in the tweet I just twatted on Twitter through the Tech News Twitter account from Evan. And then Cheryl sends in one from DW.com out of Germany about the Roma fight environmental racism, is the headline. Roma communities driven from Romania, especially in the booming city of Cluj, say that authorities treat them like human garbage and are forcing them basically to live in landfills, which is damaging their health. And it's, Roma communities driven from their, besides the airport on the outskirts of Cluj, one of Romania's fastest growing cities, lies an enormous landfill site. As you fly in, it's easy to miss the multicolored roofs scattered between rolling green turf and mounds of waste. But At the ground level, the area is teeming with life. Horse-drawn carts cross paths with empty garbage trucks returning to the city. Barefoot children run between makeshift wooden houses, and crows circle overhead. It's called Pata Rat, the country's biggest landfill, and long one of the most glaring environmental sins. For decades, pollution reached from untreated waste and garbage fires blazed, occasionally killing the occupants of those wooden shacks. Under pressure from the European Union, the city began work on closing the site in 2015. Some 2.5 million metric tons of waste accumulated over 70 years and covering an area the size of 27 soccer fields, were turned over. Yet for the 1,500 Roma people who still live there, it's still very much alive, and so is the environmental hazard on their doorstep. And this was not an ecological landfill. It was not built in line with European standards. All of these toxic substances went into the soil, into the groundwater. Everything in the area is polluted. And it's an interesting story about the Roma that live in landfills around Romania. So the next one is about from Wired UK, which says this is why all electric cars look exactly the same. That we're approaching a future where car drive platforms will be white labeled goods from Foxconn-like suppliers. Differentiation will be much harder. And you'll see a photo in the tweet I just sent out, which is Tesla's platform underneath all of their cars. It's basically a battery pack, which covers the bottom of the car, and it's basically 4 wheels and a battery pack, and you can slap on whatever car design on top of this battery pack with wheels you want, whether it be a truck or a car or a van or a sedan or a hatchback or whatever. So the cars are not going to look the same. In fact, it enables a far bigger variety of car shapes than was made possible by combustion engines. So the Wired headline is clickbait, which is uncharacteristic for Wired, and shame on you, Wired, for kind of diminishing your reputation for clickbait in this. But no, it's not going to. Cars aren't going to be approaching looking all exact. This is why all electric cars look exactly the same. Is just on its face, patently stupid. The Cybertruck looks nothing like any other car, and there's nobody's accusing EVs of looking the same. If anything, the combustion cars look a lot the same, especially the trucks. So, Wired's doing clickbait, but it does talk about how EVs are made with a similar battery pack at the as the bottom frame of the car, and they're correct that other suppliers like Foxconn will get into the business that Tesla's in of building this bottom base and then enable anyone else to build the design of the top of the car where the passengers sit and all of that, and you just kind of marry that to the bottom battery pack, and it enables a lot of people to become EV companies, which is what you're seeing in China. There's a whole bunch of companies like Xiaomi are becoming EV companies, and there's going to be Tesla-like companies that power the bottom of the car, and then any consumer electronic device company can build the top of the car, and that is going to happen. And by the way, smartphones all kind of look the same, don't they? But
say, Tyler, that half of China's aluminum deposits for building these types of vehicles comes slightly more than half comes from Guinea, and from the old regime under Guinea. And one of the things that that the new leader of Guinea is doing is apparently reevaluating all of those Chinese contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Just apropos of nothing in particular when it comes to EV vehicles.
Mm-hmm. So the next headline's from Todd McLeese, who joins us in the audience. And the headline from AP News says, "No cashiers, please. Futuristic supermarket opens in the Middle East, Dubai." The Middle East on Monday got its first completely automated cashierless store, as retail giant Carrefour rolled out in Dubai, apparently, an Amazon-like cashierless store. These are becoming a thing. You can remove all the humans from the equation, and they are. And the supermarkets are making nice progress in removing all the humans from their stores. So thank you for that one, Todd. And Damalera sends in this one from Financial Times, that why it's mad to use an algorithm to hire a person. The tale of one boss who thought Uber ratings were the answer is instructive. And we kind of covered a similar article at the start. And then someone sends in this one about moon-bound boxes turn sand into solar energy. A small Luxembourg startup wants to send self-contained solar panel factories to Earth's deserts as a stepping stone to the moon for generating power in remote locations. And the next one is from Nikkei Japan, that SMIC in China to build a $9 billion Shanghai chip plant to challenge TSMC in Taiwan. The Chinese contract chipmaker looks to meet demand for lower-end semiconductors. And The Verge headline says that Volkswagen is reviving its iconic microbus as an electronic robo-taxi. You won't get to ride until 2025. Yesterday, we read a headline that Volkswagen claims it expects to be at level 4 autonomous in 2025, and Germany legally allows level 4 autonomous vehicles to operate in Germany. So they expect to switch over to autonomous driving throughout Germany in 2025. And then someone sends in this one from South China Morning Post, that Singapore residents with 2 Sinovac doses, the vaccine from China, are finding they need a Pfizer boost, which is precisely what Thailand found out as well. More than 85,000 people in the island nation of Singapore have chosen to pay for Sinovac shots despite having free access to Pfizer and Moderna jabs, but now they realize that stuff ain't really working, and they need Pfizer shots, just as has happened in Thailand. Which makes me very curious indeed how China is dealing with Delta, knowing that their vaccines don't really work against Delta, as we've found out now in Singapore and Thailand. And yet they're claiming they have no cases of Delta, even though they did have it in 9 provinces about 2 weeks ago. So, anybody else with headlines they'd like to share?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna read one of the things that we heard, if you remember, Tyler, a week or 2 ago. OPay, Chinese-backed Nigerian fintech payments startup that became another unicorn, actually the 3rd biggest unicorn in Africa, even though, some Africans still complain that it's really fully Chinese, except that it's run in the African market. And now they are in big trouble in India for money laundering investigations. So, and one of the interesting thing that I saw is one of the big founders and also the big controller of this startup, his name is, I think the Chinese one, his name is called Zhu Yong, has been accused of different things in different countries outside of China with regulatory bodies. So yeah, that's not really good news for Africa, isn't it? But anyway, we can we can take solace that it's not really African founder. That's the news.
How interesting too that OPay, one of their main investors is SoftBank, which is of course deeply controversial.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Also, I believe
so,
it's
yeah,
OPay is a Chinese founder as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a Chinese founder, and like Charles said, pretty much all of the investors are Chinese, SoftBank and others, and they have been really pretty much all of them are Chinese, but it's just that they have few African, I don't know even if they are co-founders, but it's fully controlled by Zhu, I think. But at least they have some African non-executive kind of players, and also they are doing a lot of the business activities in Africa. That's how it kind of claims to be African based, but it's really fully Chinese and backed and run and everything by Chinese. But yeah, they are in trouble in India now for money laundering investigation. Let's put it that way. It's just accusation now.
Okay, so we got a whole bunch more headlines here. The Boston Dynamics robotic dog is now, according to The Guardian in the UK, that their robotic dog is now employed to roam Australia's Adelaide streets in search of damaged power lines. Assures public the AI canine's job is not to replace us. Okay, and El Salvador goes live with their Bitcoin as their new currency. A lot of people reporting that one. And here's a whole bunch of other ones. Someone sent this in from South China Morning Post. Chinese Air Force may have cracked how to land a hypersonic drone. Flight control computers cannot calculate a descent quickly enough at Mach 5, but Chinese researchers say they have rethought the software to work it out. So I'm retweeting that one out for those who want to read that. And then Forbes headline says, is artificial intelligence set to take over the art industry? So far, AI has demonstrated an ability to study and understand existing art and to somehow enhance or combine them to produce something new. So might we find AI art more interesting than non-AI assisted art, because music production is becoming more and more tech enabled, and the best productions of music, pop songs, are becoming more and more digitized, the whole process, and the drum beats and the kind of underlying song creation process is becoming more and more computer based. And would that not also be true of visual arts? I imagine it is. And at some point, the algorithms might make more compelling imagery and melodies than humans, and they certainly do make better music than pretty much anybody on this stage. The question is, will they make better music than Coldplay, for example? Although some people would be very fast to say, well, that would be easy. But we will see. Art and music as well might be replaced by algorithms in some inevitable future. The next article from NPR, which is National Public Radio in America, which says, the headline reads, "Forget tiger moms. Now China's chicken blood parents are pushing kids to succeed. Fierce competition." It says, fierce competition to get children into the top schools has spawned an aggressive parenting culture named for traditional medicine treatment of chicken blood. They schedule their children's days in 15-minute increments. They scour online forums and swap tips on the most effective and exclusive tutors and the best sports coaches. Some even buy second homes next to the best public schools. Forget China tiger moms. These are China's Jiwa, or chicken parents, who are known for their attentive, some say obsessive, parenting style. The term is used to describe aggressive helicopter parenting and comes from an unproven Chinese medicine treatment dating back to the 1950s, in which someone is injected with fresh chicken blood to stimulate energy. Jiwa parenting culture, a relatively new phenomena, is now in the crosshairs of Chinese authorities. At a time when the government wants to see families have more children and raising more future workers, it fears that hyper-competitive parenting pressures, combined with the meteoric growth of China's private education sector, now worth billions, are depriving inequity, are deepening inequality, and discouraging couples from having larger families, a priority of the country's new 3-child policy. And kudos to NPR to be the first American Western publication to actually attribute the crackdown on the ed tech industry to the birth rate. You did it, NPR. Kudos to you. As more parents complain about burnout brought on by the Jiwa culture, there's concern that the financial and emotional toll is making many reluctant to have a second, much less third child. Exactly right. NPR, You apparently spoke to people in China and actually figured out what we figured out 3 weeks ago, which apparently no other Western publication has been able to do. So we applaud you, NPR. You did it. The government's limiting private after-school classes as a desire to stay ahead, and the belief in the power of the education may mean Chinese families spend on average between 1/4 and nearly half of their incomes on supplemental education activities, helping fuel the success of the private education companies worth billions. And in July, the CCP implemented sweeping rules to curtail the number of private after-school classes in which parents can enroll their kids. All education companies must register as nonprofits, and no new licenses will be issued to tutoring agencies. But the new rules have only made some GWA parents more determined to maximize their kids' chance of success. Because of these policies, parents are even more convinced of the potential risks of social immobility, says Rainey Lee, a Beijing GWA parent of 2 daughters. And there's your source right there. NPR actually went to people on the fucking ground in Beijing. It wasn't that hard, was it? You did it, NPR. What's your excuse, Bloomberg and Reuters, NAP, and everybody else who can't seem to figure this very obvious fact out? You just call up the parents in Beijing. They'll tell you what the fuck is happening, as we did, as NPR has done in this article. And they spoke to someone named Rainey Lee, a Beijing parent with 2 daughters. And as Rainey tells NPR, they are more eager than ever to propel their kids into elite circles and more willing than ever to cut back on their own spendings in order to invest in their children. And it's a fantastic story of...
I wonder if this is going to have, I mean, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I wonder if this is or will be somehow connected to how China is, taking control of edtech as well, right? Like, because if people are basically, over educating their kids, could there be some kind of a connection to having more control by the government over that as well?
Yes, they've already announced their new programs for the school kids, starting at the earliest all the way through university. And it's a far bigger emphasis on what Uncle Xi's thoughts, which is instilling Marxist values from the earliest age through university age. And they even break down very clearly what each age group will be learning in Marxist philosophies at each age group. And they are also removing English because they don't like the influence of particular countries on their citizens.
Wow, and they're not going to need English for much longer since, the main entertainment platforms are now actually Chinese. So they're kind of handling everything by themselves.
Yeah, but that came about shortly after the crackdown on the education policies, which happened about 3 weeks ago. It was about a week and a half ago that the new education platform, much more Marxist emphasizing, and they had their big annual meeting where Uncle Xi announced his big program for the education system, which was a much bigger emphasis on his personal philosophies, and which we went through these in Chinese. Cheryl sent in the actual documents in Mandarin, and then we translated them into English, and we read through them, and it's precisely as I just said. They have a step-by-step plans of what each age group will be focusing on, and there's a tremendous new attention and focus on Marxism and the values of communism, and in very detail of what lessons they'll be learning with each age group from 5 to 25. So
that's crazy. And governments controlling like how the education sector works and what's in it. Like, I feel like that's also a trend. For example, here in Poland, like I mentioned in one of our meetings, like I mentioned, the abortion laws that Poland passed, which are like really, really strict. And this is all tied also like to religious beliefs. And it's also tied to, trying to get the population basically higher again. So like for people to have more children. So now what they're doing in Poland with education is they're switching literature from the traditional books and, poetry and things that we used to read here to basically, Pope John Paul's letters and things like that. So basically to religious texts in the normal, educational curriculum instead of normal literature, which we had before. So I see that actually reflected in Poland in a different direction, but kind of with the same thing in mind to basically control the population.
Mm-hmm. Because countries that have are dependent on a lot of physical labor need people, where countries that are more thought workers, like Scandinavia and that are higher up the stack, they don't feel the need to replace the humans, because the humans aren't really doing a lot of the work physically. It can be delegated or whatever. But to your point, the next headline from the BBC is TikTok overtakes YouTube for average watch time in the US and the UK. TikTok has higher watch time per user than video giant YouTube in the US and the UK, which is a Chinese app, which, by the way, in China has said very clearly the state needs to take over the algorithms of the social media networks to emphasize more Marxist content, their own words, and reduce the negative influences of effeminate men and celebrities, and reduce other, and which, by the way, relates back to what they feel is a solution to solve the declining birth rate. They know there's a declining birth rate, and they believe the way to address that is to reduce the amount of the effeminate celebrity culture, which is being influenced by the Korean and Japanese media, and they want to remove that, and so they need to control the algorithms to remove that. So they're telling
makes you wonder what they will be promoting in the West,
Precisely my next point, which is, now that TikTok is in the US, interesting that China isn't interested in removing negative content in the US in the same way they are concerned about controlling the algorithms and removing it in China. And it does make you wonder, what kind of content might they actually want to increase in TikTok's use in the US, now that they have one of the 3 board seats on TikTok. So they have a very firm
Didn't President Trump talk? Didn't he ban it from the U.S. or supposedly? But then it got an legal fight or whatever.
Yeah.
I think he tried to gift it to Oracle, if I recall.
Correct. He tried to get Oracle to buy it. Yeah. And that didn't work out in the end. And although there's a new call to reevaluate TikTok now that the CCP has one of the 3 board seats of TikTok and the influence that it's having in the US and etc. And to Magda's point, are they weaponizing it? Well, Facebook's head of security says China's weaponizing Facebook by creating campaigns and misinformation campaigns, particularly around COVID and whatnot. So would they weaponize TikTok? Well, it's their own fucking app. They're weaponizing Facebook, and they don't even own Facebook, and Facebook saying they're trying to weaponize Facebook. Well, there's no one at TikTok to warn they're weaponizing TikTok, because it's their app. And maybe now we know why Clubhouse is filled with rooms full of folks, going on and on about how the vaccine has microchips. So the next one is Kim Kardashian from BBC. Kim Kardashian crypto ad singled out by financial watchdog. An Instagram ad by Kim Kardashian was criticized in a speech by the FCA chairman Charles Rendell. And Kim Kardashian, a crypto ad singled out by financial watchdog. And the next one is from the New York Times. It's called Operation Chillax. We will give you a week off. Please don't quit. Companies are trying to combat burnout from working remotely by offering more time off and other perks. And lastly, from Reuters, and this coming from Anita in the audience, that George Soros says that BlackRock's Chinese investments are likely to lose money. Billionaire investor George Soros said that BlackRock investing billions of dollars into China now is a mistake and will likely lose money for BlackRock. And so that
He's right. And I think they're trying to hedge their downside by basically raping the American public by basically trying to algorithmically purchase houses here. No bueno.
So we got 2 more hours of tweets to go, but I'm going to save that now that it's the top of the hour. So we're going to meet again in 6 hours and go through the rest of the tweets. And then our friends in the US will hopefully be back in the office to update the headlines for us. And so a big thank you to everyone for another fun headline-filled